Early 1800s Ireland, lush, green, and postcard perfect, a land of rolling hills and misty mornings that seemed to promise abundance and peace. But beneath the beauty, life was harsh and unforgiving for most. The picturesque scenery masked a daily struggle for survival. Most Irish were tenant farmers, renting tiny plots from absentee English landlords who rarely set foot on Irish soil. Imagine trying to feed your family and pay rent from a single acre, barely the size of a football field. Every inch of earth mattered, and every harvest was a gamble. The land kept getting divided, generation after generation, leaving families with less and less to survive on. Many lived in cramped cottages, scraping by on what little they could grow. At the top, untouched by hardship, stood the Anglo-Irish elite, living in luxury on vast estates, their wealth built on the labor of others. At the bottom, the Catholic majority, shut out from power and land by old laws, faced discrimination and poverty as a daily reality. By the 1840s, Ireland was a society deeply divided by class and religion, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The gap between rich and poor was stark and growing. The rural poor depended almost entirely on one crop to survive: the potato. It was their main food, their lifeline, and their hope. Yet, despite hardship, they were resilient, holding on to a rich culture of music, dance, and storytelling. But they were always just one bad harvest away from disaster. Pre-famine Ireland wasn't stable or secure. It was a society on the brink, where anxiety and uncertainty hung in the air. All it needed was one crisis to tip it over the edge, to turn daily struggle into catastrophe. And that crisis, the arrival of the potato blight, was about to arrive, changing Ireland forever. Enter the potato, the unlikely hero and, soon, the villain. Not native to Ireland, the potato thrived in poor soil and could feed a family for a year from a single acre. It was nutritious, easy to grow, and fueled a population boom. Ireland nearly doubled in size between 1780 and 1841. But this total reliance on one crop, a monoculture, was risky. The potato became food, animal feed, and cash crop all in one. By the 1840s, a third of the population depended almost exclusively on potatoes. There was no backup plan, no plan B. Potatoes were breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The entire economy and social structure revolved around the annual harvest. It was a house of cards built on a single starchy foundation, and that foundation was about to collapse. When the potato failed, everything else would fall with it. Disaster was just around the corner. In 1845, a mysterious blight swept across Ireland's potato fields, leaving farmers bewildered and anxious. The potato, a staple food for millions, was suddenly under threat, and no one knew why. Practically overnight, healthy green crops turned black and rotten. Phytophthora infestans, an invisible invader, had arrived. The disease spread rapidly, infecting field after field, leaving devastation in its wake. The blight thrived in Ireland's damp, cool climate, multiplying with every rainstorm. By the end of the first year, up to half the potato crop was gone, and the rural landscape was transformed into a scene of despair. People clung to hope, believing it was a one-time disaster. But infected seed potatoes meant the next year was even worse, a near-total wipeout. Fields that once promised life now offered only empty earth. For the poor, there was nothing else to eat. Other food, grain, cattle, butter, was produced in abundance, but it was exported to England to pay landlords and debts, leaving the Irish with empty stomachs. Ireland wasn't truly short of food. The real crisis was that the poor had no access to it. Markets overflowed with produce, but it was out of reach for those who needed it most. The British government's response? Laissez-faire economics, let the market sort it out. Officials believed interfering would do more harm than good, so they stood by as the crisis deepened. Public works and imported corn arrived, but these efforts were too little, too late. The scale of the disaster overwhelmed the limited relief that trickled in. Starving people were forced to build pointless roads for pennies, while ships loaded with food continued to leave Irish ports, bound for foreign markets. The government's slow, inadequate response turned a natural disaster into a human catastrophe, deepening the suffering and fueling anger and resentment. The famine wasn't just about crop failure, it was about failed systems, neglect, and indifference from those in power. Families mourned not just lost harvests, but lost hope. Ireland was left to burn in the darkness, while help trickled in far too slowly to make a real difference. The suffering seemed endless. the stage was set for tragedy on a massive scale, as families abandoned their homes and a nation was forever changed by hunger and loss. As food vanished, Irish society unraveled. Starvation hollowed out bodies and spirits. Disease, typhus, cholera, dysentery, killed more than hunger itself. Workhouses became overcrowded death traps. In Skibbereen, County Cork, a magistrate described finding families reduced to skeletons, huddled on filthy straw. People died in their cabins, on roadsides, mouths stained green from eating grass. Traditional hospitality vanished. Fear and desperation ruled. Evictions soared. Families thrown out, cottages destroyed, the homeless wandering in search of help. The social fabric tore apart, society collapsed into silence and grief. The horror was everywhere: decay, death, and the end of community. The trauma of these years would haunt Ireland for generations. The famine was not just a crisis, but a wound that shaped the nation's soul. With starvation and eviction everywhere, millions faced a terrible choice: stay and die, or leave everything behind. Between 1845 and 1855, about 2 million Irish emigrated, a quarter of the population gone in a decade. The population of Ireland has never fully recovered. Most went to North America, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Canada. Some went to Australia or Britain seeking any hope of survival. Emigration was both an act of desperation and of agency, a vote against a system that failed them. Letters from abroad promised jobs and food, but the journey meant leaving family and homeland forever. Many left with anger toward British authorities, fueling Irish nationalism for generations. The decision to leave was heartbreaking, but it was also a leap of hope. The Irish diaspora would reshape the world. For many, anywhere was better than the hell they left behind. The journey across the Atlantic was a nightmare. For many Irish families fleeing famine, hope was their only companion as they boarded ships bound for North America. The ocean was vast and unforgiving, and the threat of disaster loomed with every crashing wave. Coffin ships were overcrowded, filthy, and disease-ridden. 1 in 5 passengers died on some voyages. Below deck, passengers endured suffocating heat, foul air, and the constant fear of illness. Food and clean water were scarce, and families huddled together for comfort as storms battered the fragile vessels. Typhus and other diseases spread rapidly. The dead were buried at sea. Each day brought new losses, and the sound of mourning echoed through the ship as loved ones were consigned to the waves, never to reach the New World. In Canada, Grosse Ile Quarantine Station was overwhelmed. Thousands died and were buried in mass graves. The island became a place of sorrow, a final resting place for so many who had hoped for a better life. In America, Irish immigrants faced poverty, discrimination, and "No Irish Need Apply" signs. They arrived exhausted and penniless, only to find doors closed and opportunities scarce. They crowded into slums, took the hardest jobs, and faced prejudice from the established population. Life in the cities was harsh, with entire families squeezed into tiny damp rooms, struggling to survive. But they built tight-knit communities around the Catholic Church and mutual aid societies. These networks offered support, comfort, and a sense of belonging in a foreign land. Irish women worked as servants, men dug canals and built railroads. Their labor helped shape the infrastructure of a growing nation, even as they endured backbreaking work and low wages. Despite hardship, they survived and adapted. Children grew up learning new customs, and families clung to their heritage while forging new identities in America. Over time, the Irish became a political force, building machines like Tammany Hall in New York. They learned to organize, vote, and advocate for their communities, gradually gaining influence and respect. The famine generation's resilience would change the face of American cities. Their determination and spirit helped transform neighborhoods and left a lasting legacy. The journey was perilous, but it was the start of a new chapter. Against all odds, they reached distant shores, carrying with them hope for the future. The Irish would leave their mark on the world, shaping culture, politics, and communities wherever they settled. The Great Famine changed Ireland, and the world, forever. Ireland's population never recovered, the old system of tiny farms vanished, the Irish language declined, and the trauma lingered for generations. The famine fueled Irish nationalism and the drive for independence. The story of a starving nation became central to Irish identity. Globally, the Irish diaspora helped build modern Britain, America, and beyond. They became workers, leaders, and icons. Think President John F. Kennedy. The Irish created a global network, celebrated every St. Patrick's Day from Boston to Sydney. The famine's legacy is one of suffering, survival, and transformation. It's a story of how catastrophe in one small country reshaped nations and created new histories. The echoes of the famine still shape Ireland and its millions of descendants today.